Ready to escape into a world of enchanting pixels? What is it, my peeps? And today we're going to be continuing Speedrun. So let's go. The Sega Saturn Years. Is that... Oh, I just skipped the page. Okay. Dead ends. Despite considerable marketing efforts, Sonic had never enjoyed the same degree of success in his homeland as he had in the West. When Sega of Japan, faced the task of launching his 32-bit Saturn console, the firm felt it had the obvious flagship title, a conversion of arcade smash hit Virtua Fighter. But if the Japanese mothership was content to move its focus away from Sonic, Sega's Western arms were not ready to retire the character that served them so lucratively. With Sonic Team now wholly occupied developing a new Saturn action title, Nights into Dreams, Sega's subsidiaries sought help from a variety of sources to keep revenue flowing in from the aging Mega Drive and to promote the new Saturn. 2 years after Sonic and Knuckles, the Hedgehog made his final appearance on the console that had spawned him. Nice play on words there. In a title created by British developer Traveller's Tales, better known these days for its successful family-oriented Lego action games, as well as a few Disney games too, might I add. John Burton's Cheshire-based Codehouse was approached by Sega to produce a Sonic title for Christmas 1996. I always forget Sonic 3D Blast was supposed to be a Christmas 96 release. But anyways, the last year that the Mega Drive was commercially viable. The game was released under a variety of names, being known as Sonic 3D Flicky's Island in the UK. The design evolved from a rejected idea for Sonic 3, with the playfield viewed isometrically. Oh! So Sonic 3 was originally going to be a isometric game. Cool. The released version of Sonic 3D, better known in America, Sonic 3D Blast, departed sharply from the usual linear levels. The Hedgehog had to rescue 5 birds trapped inside the level's badniks and lead them to safety. Before he can clear each act, the winged creatures in the series had always been dubbed Flicky, in a homage to an 80s arcade title. But now, that title's mother-hen concept was patched into the gameplay wholesale. Sonic's quest was to free the extra-dimensional birds from Robotnik's clutches. The game's level structure was similar to early titles. Each zone was made up of 2 acts and a boss, with special stages accessible on payment of a 50-ring tariff. Oh yeah, that's right. Oops. The exploration and creature gilding were a necessary compensation for the loss of speed and imprecise controls arising from the isometric view. Traveller's Tales' technical know-how was not open to question, but its design work failed to reach the same standards. Sonic 3D Blast is slow and fiddly to play, feeling like an also-ran. There is a cast-iron way of distinguishing between a bona fide Sonic game... Sonic game with imagination and creative intent behind it, from a tie-in knocked out to make a quick buck. Surprisingly, this distinction pays no heed of overall quality. As stated in the introduction, development of a Sonic title is rarely more than a couple of decisions away from disaster. Many talented and dedicated individuals have put their names to games which were slated by critics and spurned by the public. Right? You could say that about most other games, not just in the Sonic... Actually, no, you could say that about the gaming industry as a whole. Anyway, the key is in the setting of the levels and the amount of thought that's been put into them. Given that Sonic games are all about moving through interesting places in an interesting way, it is essential that the games avoid 2 traps in their selection of zones. The first is simply adhering to the generic levels found in a cliché platform game. Fire, ice, etc. The other pitfall is rehashing the archetypal, I cannot say that word, perception of a Sonic title by opening with a tropical paradise and moving through a pinball-like area, a flying fortress, and the other iterations of ideas featured in Sonic Team's first 3 titles. This is best demonstrated by looking at the occasions when Sonic Team itself returned to old ideas, as it's noticeable that the team always managed to add a new spin to the existing concept. The flying battery zone The flying battery zone shown in Sonic and Knuckles, that's a bit of a tongue twister, is a faster paced, more high-tech setting than the similar Wing Fortress zone from Sonic 2. The Emerald Coast stage, which opened Sonic Adventure 1, is a much more commercially developed area than the idyllic tropical paradise of its inspiration, Sonic 2's Emerald Hill. Really? That was inspired by Emerald Hill? I didn't know that. Wow, okay. Even the most regressive title to be produced on Yuji Naka's watch, 2004's Sonic Heroes, added at least one wholly novel level concept in the form of Hang Castle. Looking at the high-profile 16-bit Sonic games not developed by Sonic Team, Sonic CD passes this test, bringing something new to the party. Whatever other design failings it possessed, Sonic 3D Blast falls back on the already tired old standbys and offers little to the player. The US's Sega Technical Institute was not finished with Sonic, despite no longer being home to Yuji Naka's band of coders. Internal experiments with Sonic 2's engine included code for virtual elastic band that would tie Sonic and Tails together, enabling all sorts of slingshot mechanics. The tech demo, nicknamed both Sonic Crackers and Sonic Stadium, was greenlit for development as a full-blown Mega Drive game, but its development is far from smooth. Also, fun fact, the soundtrack for Sonic Crackers/Stadium, I believe, I'm not sure if Sonic Stadium was originally Sonic Crackers, and then that got changed to Sonic Stadium before it became what's about to go on here. But, I know the soundtrack for Sonic Crackers is available, but I think it got changed to Sonic Stadium before becoming Knuckles Chaotix, just glancing down at the bottom of the page. Anyway, just something to keep in mind. Was greenlit for development as a full Mega Drive game, but its development was far from smooth. The title was quickly switched to the Mega 32X, aka the Sega 32X, an add-on for the 16-bit system which fixed a cut-down version of the Saturn's processors to the aging Mega Drive/Genesis. The idea was to prop up the commercial chances of this ailing bolt-on, and several members of the staff from Sonic CD were drafted in to assist with the development of the game. It soon became obvious that the 32X hardware was beyond help, and its existence was simply diverting Sega's resources from the Saturn, which faced stiff competition from Sony's PlayStation console. The rubber stamp of Sonic's presence was pulled from the 32X game, which received the title of Knuckles Chaotix. The plot involved Dr. Robotnik's attack on a theme park, which left its defenders imprisoned in a giant claw machine. Only one of the team could be released at a time via link ring technology. Before tackling each act, Knuckles may swap his partner or even surrender himself in order to allow two of his friends their freedom at once. Which honestly just sounds depressing. Anyways, the cast was drawn from an array of unlikely sources. Vector the Crocodile had been intended for inclusion in Sonic's first game, but was dropped when Naka and his colleagues decided to focus on one hero alone. Resurrected as the leader of the Chaotix, he was joined by custom-created characters Espio the Chameleon and Charmy B. Further adding to the numbers was Mighty the Armadillo, fresh from his turn in the Sega Sonic Trackball arcade game. Yes, because at one point, apparently Sonic's name was just going to be Sega Sonic, and then Super Sonic, and then finally just Sonic. Anyway, the game is made up of five themed zones within the park, each of which is broken down into 5 acts. In a break with tradition, these levels are tackled in any order, with the next area chosen from a semi-random selection machine located in the game's hub area. The levels are extremely atmospheric, with the flat-out roller coaster Speed Slider a clear inspiration for the later Sonic games' highway stages. The least remarkable zone, Amazing Arena, kind of ironic, right, was enlivened by a gimmick whereby Knuckles would have to locate and destroy a particular machine somewhere in the level before he could cross the finish line. This touch, reminiscent of Sonic CD, made the common origins of the title clear. Boss design is a little weak overall, aside from a nightmarish cross between Metal Sonic and the Xenomorph? What? Okay then. At least I think it's talking about the Alien franchise up there. Must be. Huh. Anyway. design which includes the action. The pastel art direction is a curious choice, possibly a deliberate reversal of the garish colors in Sonic CD. There's a richness of detail here that goes beyond any other 2D Sonic game, and some areas are remarkably memorable. Sound design is good, with appropriate and striking music. The game is actually much faster than the Mega Drive's 2D Sonic titles, with the elastic serving as a means of rapid acceleration above and beyond the classic spin dash. Several throw moves prevent the supporting character being stuck behind a part of the scenery. A particular highlight of the game is its special stages. Although not winning any awards of originality, with Sonic 3's blue spears added to a hexagonal tube, the 32X 3D abilities allowed a considerable improvement on Sonic 2's sprite-based half-pipe. The tube often opens out into a true landscape, and the implementation of gravity physics makes falling off a real threat. Knuckles Chaotix is a solid title, but its 32X home appeared to condemn it to obscurity, until Sonic Heroes' need for a bulked-up cast saw its stars given an unlikely second chance in 2004. The product that arose from Sonic Crackers was not the only title in which the Sega Technical Institute was working on. Although Sonic Mars had an even rockier ride than its sister game, the title was unceremoniously removed from its 32X host platform by Sego? Typo? Okay. I'm gonna say that's a typo. Oops. By Sega of America's boss, Bernie Stolar, and repurposed in a bid to give the Saturn a high-profile Sonic title to spearhead its second Christmas on the market. A series of poor decisions in designing the 32-bit console had resulted in Sega's machine. See, it's spelled correctly there. Why is it not spelled correctly up there? Anyway, in Sega's machine being significantly outsold by the cheaper PlayStation. Sony's system was better suited to generating polygon virtual assets, which were becoming the default method of rendering graphics. Stolar was convinced that the lack of a Sonic game was a key factor in the Saturn's fading fortunes, and sought to rectify this. Sonic Extreme, as it was rebranded, was not a 3D platform game as the term would be understood today. The mechanics of the title are best understood through comparison with one of the Saturn's launch games. Has anyone played Bug? Just myself then? Anyway, that's interesting fourth wall break. Anyways, Bug was released as a part of the Saturn's first wave software, and seemed to point the way forward for the platforming game that had proved so popular on 16-bit consoles. Unlike how we think of a 3D adventure title today, Bug followed a more limited premise, being a 2D platformer with a twist. Holding up on the directional pad no longer caused the lead character to stare at the sky. Instead, they would walk into the screen along a narrow path, effectively adding a second plane of 2D platforming to the title, instead of a true 3D experience. The effect was achieved using a combination of 3D polygons for the levels, and then 2D sprites for the player and the enemies. Obviously, the dynamic camera angles we know today were impossible under this setup. Ironically, Sonic had made a cameo appearance in one of Bug's bonus levels, racing against the insect to pick up power-ups before dashing off at speed. It's something of a tribute to the Sonic 3 sprite, that it could be inserted into a next-generation title without looking out of place. Right? Anyway, as many readers may be aware, the Bug but faster Sonic Extreme never made it to market, due to the limitation of both Sega of America's resources and the console is being built for. What we know of the title is an intriguing mix of fan-pleasing decisions and elements that sounded much more eccentric. The art direction is rather odd, with the checkerboard motif that the Mega Drive applied to zone walls being taken to its logical conclusion as a subtle texture on the floor. Creatively, Sonic Extreme had a lot in common with the Archie universe. The plot outline feels very much in the US concept of the character, with a distinguished researcher being targeted by Dr. Robotnik, keen to steal his work. The researcher calls in Sonic to help struggle against the mad scientist, and the Hedgehog teams up with the scientist's young niece to defeat Robotnik. There are a few touches which endear the project to fans, most notably the use of the distinctive American Sonic logo, and an early screenshot showing the inclusion of Metal Sonic as one of the game's bosses. For much of 1996, the in-game development was marketed as being Sega's answer to Mario 64. The true 3D platforming game that provided a demonstration of the new N64 console's technical superiority over the Saturn and PlayStation. Oh, come on. There we go. Sonic Extreme was well received at the crucial the crucial LA E3 trade show, with much interest attracted by the numerous gameplay features implemented to overcome bugs problems. The screen was deliberately distorted by a reflex lens, fisheye perspective. This improved players' peripheral vision, allowing them to see further to Sonic's left and right than a flat display would permit. Other additions felt like more uncomfortable compromises, such as giving Sonic the ability to fire rings at enemies. This was an early recognition of the problem in depth perception, when using the Hedgehog's traditional jumping spin attack in a 3D environment. Throughout the summer of that year, however, rumors about the poor health of the title began to circulate. All divisions of Sega became keener to talk about the Mega Drive Sonic 3D Blast, and the Saturn marketing campaign noticeably focused on Sonic Team's blockbuster, Night into Dreams. The inevitable happened in October when it was announced that Sonic's glorious 32-bit debut was being placed on hold indefinitely. The impression at the time was that Sonic Extreme was cancelled by orders of Sega Japan, who were unhappy with the project creatively. This is partially true, but the initial loss of momentum was due to initial problems at Sega of America. The production process placed an unprecedented level of stress on the lead programmer for the title, Chris Coffin. The coder had written the game's 3D engine single-handedly and had been living in his office for months before the game entered the focused crunch period, where the title's assets would be pulled together to form the finished product. When the inevitable happened and Coffin's health collapsed under the pressure, it was obvious that the game could not be completed without outside assistance. When interviewed by fan site Sonic Cults, producer Mike Willis, I think that's how you pronounce that, anyway. Mike W. recounted how Bernie Stoller had asked if everything could be done to allow work to continue. After W. speculated on the use of sophisticated Nights into Dreams 3D game engine, a couple of days later, the complete source code for Sonic Team's masterpiece dutifully arrived from Japan. It's at this point that the politics start to play a part, and 1 week later, W was told to halt use of the engine and return the assets. Yuji Naka himself, now moving through the ranks of Sega's senior management, was the source of this instruction. Despite his increasing desire to take full control of his creation, he'd been civil to the Sonic Extreme team during a visit to the US earlier in the year. The appropriation of his Nights into Dreams technology, however, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Sonic's 32-bit epic was dead in the water. Punching, kicking, and screaming. The principal weakness, of the Saturn console was its immensely complex internal architecture, with a total of 8 processors running and working together to run code. The machine was designed in the expectations that the 2D sprite-based graphics of the 8-bit and 16-bit hardware generations would continue to be the primary method of playing games. The competition had other ideas, however, and Sony's PlayStation was specifically constructed to render 3D polygons of with Sony's technical demos receiving a rapturous reception at trade shows. Sega attempted to boost the Saturn's 3D capabilities. Despite these 11-hour efforts, the Sega machine was always more at home working on a flat plane than in 3 dimensions. The Saturn sold a respectable number of consoles in its native Japan, where 2D games remained popular, but struggled in the West. By autumn of 1996, Sega of Japan had come round to agreeing with Bernie Stoller that in the absence of the company's mascot from Saturn during the first year, its life had hurt it. Just as Sonic had always been more popular in the West, the Saturn's flagship series, Virtua Fighter, remained an Eastern phenomenon. While the technical brilliance of AM2's fighting game effortlessly captured Japanese arcades, it was the PlayStation's hovership racing game Wipeout which defined 32-bit consoles in Europe. Very interesting how they call it hovership. Anyway, courting both Japanese and Western markets simultaneously was essential if the Saturn, was to have any hope of recovery. It was decided to restore Sonic to prominence, with control of the character abruptly removed from the American and European arms of Sega. The termination of Sonic Extreme was the first outward sign of this, but it was soon completed by a plethora of initiatives, as Sega of Japan metabolized Sonic into its development environment. The first of Sega Japan's new wave of titles had a haphazard origin. One of the programmers behind AM2's secondary beat-em-up, Fighting Vipers, undertook a lunchtime project of coding Sonic into the game. When Yu Suzuki, head of the studio, saw the gag, he promptly pitched a full-blown title to his former subordinate, Yuji Naka. Now the undisputed leader of Sonic Team, Naka was doubtful that the Hedgehog's physique would make fistcuffs believable, but he gave his approval to the project. The result was the arcade game Sonic the Fighters, known as Sonic Championship in the West. As might be expected, the title was largely modeled on Fighting Vipers gameplay, with cast of characters battling for the chance to pilot the one-man rocket ship Tails had created to assault the orbital Death Egg 2. Backgrounds for the game's arenas were in some instances inspired by memorable Sonic levels, while others were new, if not particularly original. The developers fulfilled what they saw as the duty of those working on the Sonic franchise to introduce new characters, including a wrestling polar bear named Bark, and Bean, a bomb-dropping duck inspired by a previous Sega arcade game. Although Bean and Bark failed to stick, being ignored by Sonic Team and others, AM2 did manage to make one contribution to the Sonic-verse. They kittied Amy Rose out with a Pico Pico squeaky mallet, which has since become her trademark weapon. Mako Maro's soundtrack is an odd beast. While attempting to describe the sound direction as wacky and comedic, due to the choice of instruments, the actual music itself is tight and controlled. Interestingly, Maro's nerves seem to fail him when it comes to composing themes for the series' main characters. Bland compositions for Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are at odds with the wonderful pieces that accommodate Metal Sonic's appearance and striking tracks for Bean and Bark. As was becoming standard, the music was given a CD release, with a bonus track that included in the form of the fantastic, unused piece, Sunset Town. Sonic the Fighters could have easily served a role in building the character's Japanese popularity, reintroducing him to the fighting game-dominated territory Sega senior management. However, we're extremely cautious about showing Sonic participating in violence, and the title received an extremely small arcade release. A planned home conversion to the Saturn was scrapped due to a shortage of programming resources within Sega. A similarly tentative effort is found on Sega's greenlighting a Sonic anime production, which made it to the market in Japan during the middle of 1996. 2 half-hour episodes of Sonic the Hedgehog were released on VHS tapes, aka Sonic OVA, with an animation style inspired by the much-praised introduction to Sonic CD. Unlike Sonic the Fighters, this venture underperformed due to public's indifference rather than managerial timidity, and no further episodes of the show were produced. This is unfortunate, as it was clearly a cut above the 2 previous American TV series. Its quality shines through in the action sequences, where a crucial balance is struck in moving Sonic's powers into a dramatic setting. A key moment is the climax of Episode 1, in which Sonic and Tails use the Tornado biplane to take down a large robot inspired by Robotnik's battlesuit at the end of the Mega Drive/Genesis Sonic 2. Sonic's abilities are neither exaggerated nor underplayed, and the way in which he eventually defeats the robot feels logical and coherent. In terms of cast, the film sees Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, inexplicably wearing an Australian hat, facing off against Robotnik, a handful of human characters created for the series, and bulk up the numbers. In the second episode, Metal Sonic has a symbiotic link to his flesh and blood counterpart. He eventually chooses to kill himself at the close of the story, rather than continue leeching life from the real Sonic, whose affair is of similar complexity to a multi-part Sonic the comic tale. The episodes made it to the West in a couple of years as Sonic the Hedgehog the Movie, with a few cuts made. The removal of several sexual references is unsurprising, but the US and PAL versions of the miniseries also lack a moment which Sonic swears at Robotnik? What? Wow. It's hard to put this down to cultural differences. Sega of Japan was genuinely relaxed about its mascot expressing himself more forcibly than is normal for a Saturday morning cartoon star. When the planned Saturn debut of Sonic was cancelled in October 1996, Sega's Japanese arm moved fast. In view of its newfound resolve to have Sonic gain a visible presence on its struggling console, a contingency plan was implemented when creating the 16-bit Sonic 3D Blast. Traveler's Tales had been instructed to create higher quality versions of the game's map renders, with a view to further to a further, Saturn version of the title. Once Sonic Extreme's cancellation was official, Sega of Japan ordered full speed ahead on the conversion, believing that any Sonic was better than none. The release of a smartened-up Saturn, Sonic 3D Blast, took place in early 1997. It's an intriguing example of all hands to the pump across the company, with a development period of a mere 7 weeks. Hold on. Okay. The core game was pieced together by Traveler's Tales, who benefited from the Saturn's formidable 2D sprite handling abilities and pulling the code across. Bridge special stages from the Mega Drive version were unceremoniously dumped. Yeah. Their replacement was a polygonal version of the half-pipe levels from Sonic 2. These fully 3D special stages were coded by Sonic Team in Japan, and at the time offered the most impressive graphics the Saturn had produced. The console's 2D predecessor drew some spectacular backdrops, and a true transparency where effects were implemented for the first time on the system. What's more, a change working on Nights into Dreams had obviously, been as good as a rest for the team, as the gameplay design here is brilliant. Concepts are gradually introduced throughout each of the levels, and then steadily built upon for the final stage. The other element of note is as always, a soundtrack. Jun Sonone's, I think I'm pronouncing that right, original Mega Drive score was dropped. Despite his work on Sonic 3, the composer wasn't yet synonymous with the character, and had departed from Sega to work on a NASCAR racing title in his place. And had departed from Sega to work on a NASCAR racing title. In his place was Sega Europe's premier composer, Richard Jacques, who became an intermediate presence in the Sonic series. Jacques' work here was intriguing. There are a couple of superb tracks, and most noticeably, the Gregorian-inspired piece that accompanies the Rusty Ruin area. The jazz-inspired special stage music is similarly magnificent. In the main, though most of the soundtrack is less than successful, it's too obvious, too poignant, being like drinking concentrated fruit coil and cordial. Luckily, Jock's association with the series, didn't end here, and his work improved greatly once she stopped trying to pastiche the original game's music. Basically replicate the game's music, or they replicate the Genesis game's music. Despite the occasional brilliance of its soundtrack and Sonic Team's contributor to the Saturn, Sonic 3D Blast inherited the gameplay failings of the Mega Drive version. When launched in early 1997, it was obviously a stopgap release. The game was a more interest, as indicating that Sonic Team was returning to work with its most famous creation than as a piece of software itself. Another such sign had emerged too much earlier, with the release of the Christmas Nights Add-on Pack for an Add-on Pack? Really? Another such sign had emerged too much earlier, with the release of the Christmas Nights Add-on Pack for Nights into Dreams. One of the unlockable bonuses was the option to play as Sonic in a tweaked version of the game's on-foot mode. Players collected 4 Idalas scattered around Spring Valley, and then did battle with the Beach Ball opera singer boss, remodeled to resemble Robotnik. I should also mention that both Ein models take inspiration from their Sonic R counterparts. Anyways, Yuji Naka and Hirokazu Yashihara's involvement in Sega Japan's focus on Sonic was formalized in March of 1997, with the launch of Project Sonic. This was an initiative across all arms of the company to revitalize the character, cement Sonic Team's creative control, and use the mascot in the fight against a dominant Sony. The first phase occurred in the summer that year, with many Japanese publicity events and a high-profile Sonic Jam Retro Pack release for the Saturn. This effectively reintroduced the character to the Japanese market, using the relative success of the Saturn in that territory to give him a second chance of a domestic fame. Amusingly, Sega of Japan had launched the obvious promotional product to tie in with the game, an appropriately named fruit conserve appeared on supermarket shelves. The intention was that Sonic Jam would lead into a massive publicity drive for a new bona fide Sonic Team 3D title in late 1997 or early 1998. The start of this plan went well, with the anticipation building across the industry after Sonic Jam was revealed at the Tokyo Game Show. The 4 Mega Drive titles had been subtly re-engineered for their appearance in the compilation. Alterations such as the inclusion of the standing start spin dash move in Sonic 1 were obvious, but there was also quieter additions such as redesigning several levels to make them easier. Despite this, the main selling point of the collection, was the inclusion of Sonic World, an experiment that Naka and his team had conducted to analyze how far the creation could be made to operate in 3D. Although presented as a means for players to access the collection's bonus features such as concept art and various short films, the significance of the feature was obvious. It was widely seen as a look ahead to what could be expected from the unannounced future title. Even today, it's a fascinating little piece. Consisting of a small Green Hill-inspired level, Sonic World is effectively a halfway house between the 2D games and the 3D formula that would emerge in 1998's Sonic Adventure 1. A number of items would be redesigned before that title appear in their 16-bit guises, most notably the power-up monitors and an old-school restart posts, instead of the more 3D-friendly restart gates. There's a look to the future in the form of Sonic's altered running pose. The Hedgehog now sprints with his arms, being held out behind him for the first time, reflecting that the character would no longer be mainly viewed from the side. Oh, so that's where that running pose actually came from. Okay then. What's missing is just as interesting. There's no homing spin attack, or its non-combat acceleration variant, suggesting that Sonic Team had not yet turned its attention to how enemies would be handled in 3D. Tails appears in the level on a looping fixed flight path, with this being the only time you'll see him carrying his hero in 3D outside of 2003's Sonic Heroes. After Sonic Jam was completed, however, the plan started to go pear-shaped. Try as they might, Sonic Team could not get the Nights into Dreams engine optimized for the Jester's fixed flight paths to deliver 3D character movement of the speed they desired, so for the second time in the year, a contingency plan was implemented. Once again, it involved a phone call to Traveler's Tales. Recognizing that a full 3D Sonic game was beyond its abilities of its present hardware, Sega decided on a change of tact. Traveler's Tales was therefore hired to produce a polygonal racing game themed around the Hedgehog's adventures. After watching Sonic 3D emerge, Sonic Team had a far greater understanding of the Kent-based developer's abilities. With its technical skills dwarfing its gameplay understanding, Sonic R was designed in Japan and built in England. With every creative decision made in the East, and then couriered as drawings or introductions to the highly skilled programmers. Using a game engine developed for a planned F1 title, Sonic R was a rush job, completed in just 3 months for release, in November 1997. Bearing in mind the fate that befell Sonic Extreme, Sonic Team was conservative, preferring a small amount of solid content to a more substantial but possibly flawed effort. As with Sonic 3D Blast, Richard Jacques was hired to provide the soundtrack, but the musician made a much stronger contribution than his compositions for the earlier title. With E3 1997 rapidly approaching and little work done on the game, Yuji Naka asked that Jacques compose a vocal track to promote the title. The resulting Supersonic Racing, with vocals by T.J. Davis, still stands as one of the strongest bits of music to be produced for a Sonic game, and has since appeared in the series in a number of forms, including Sonic Generations. Naka was highly impressed by the track, asked that for the rest of the game be scored in a similar manner, with a vocal song for each area. In complying with this instruction, Jacques was aware that it might be controversial and also provided slightly rearranged instrumental versions of each piece. So that explains why the instrumental versions appear in the game's soundtrack. Okay, that makes sense. The level's background music doesn't quite match the quality of the original, song, but it's still an extremely high standard. Jacques' place in the series' Musical Hall of Fame was acquired through his preference for fully orchestrated scores, causing him to be an occasional contributor, as opposed to one of the series' mainstays. His collaborator Davis appeared to have dropped off the earth after the title was released, only to unexpectedly perform Sonic R's soundtrack live at the Summer of Sonic convention a decade later. Sonic R seems to punch above its weight, with the slender content fondly remembered. A prime example of the game's afterlife is found in its roster of unlockable bonus characters, robotic duplicates of the original lineup. This meant an always welcome return for the Metal Sonic design created for Sonic CD, but also the only appearance of the nightmarish Tails doll. The puppet is limply suspended from a head-mounted levitation device, and it's shudderingly remembered by fans, starring in several YouTube horror parodies, At the time, however, the racing game received poor reviews from critics who had been led to expect a full 3D platform game. In truth, the writing had been on the wall for the Saturn since mid-1997, and squandering Sonic's breakout 3D title on the hardware would have thrown good money after bad. But Naka and his team had not stopped their experiments, and in the first true 3D Sonic game was only 12 months from release. Alright, that concludes this section. The next section we'll be reading in the next video will be the 128-bit years. So, whoops, hold on. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Talk to y'all later.